Good morning. On this crisp morning, I'm coming to you today from my garden, and we are going to talk about the one subject that is truly my passion: continuous glucose monitoring, or CGM. I like to start these talks with a breath technique, um, and I feel like this breath technique, which I encourage you to investigate, alternate nostril breathing, fits in really well with CGM. The reason I'm so pro breath is that it helps you to center yourself, and we live in a very rushed and crazy world, um, and your breath is actually a secret magic tool. And the reason I think it fits in so well is because CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, helps us to actually recognize the highs and the lows. Um, And this is actually the crux of diabetes management. We want to know when we're going high and when we're going low. We preferably want to prevent any low from happening. And by the same token, we want to prevent the highs. And often highs cause lows and lows cause highs. And if you're not wearing a CGM, often you just don't know. CGM is painless as opposed to needle sticks, 6 needle sticks every single day of your life into your fingers. There's no way around it. It's painful. We can try and make people feel guilty for not pricking their finger. Um, but if you are a person living with type 1 diabetes, especially if you're a child, uh, finger pricking is never going to be a fun experience. Continuous glucose monitoring gives us way, way, way more information than you can ever hope to get from a self-monitoring blood glucose record. And for me, the crux of the situation is what it enables. It enables better control. And for me, purely on this alone, it's worth its weight in gold. Information is power. When you're doing self-monitoring blood glucose, there are gaps in the information. You're missing many, many, many data points. Um, Never mind, as we've discussed already, the amount of pricks that are required to actually even come anywhere near. When you start to look at continuous glucose monitoring, you're able to recognize patterns. You're able to see the difference if you're more resistant to insulin in the morning or the afternoon or before your monthly cycle, or less resistant when you do exercise. Depending on what food you eat, you're able to see what does a glass of wine actually do to my sugar. Without CGM, you're none the wiser. And then each day is a learning. And the learning is really immense. Even my patients who currently, because Discovery only pays for 2 weeks of the month on a Libra sensor, even only having 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, the learning that they glean in those 2 weeks is life changing. So let's talk a little bit about hemoglobin A1C versus time in range versus a brand new concept called glycemic risk index. Now, your hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month average of your sugar. And as you can imagine, although this has been traditionally a great way to figure out are you controlled or not, it definitely has limitations. Um, yeah. So the higher your A1C, generally, the more out of range you are in terms of high glucose, and often this pertains to after meals, your postprandial portion of your glycemic rise. If you have a normal hemoglobin A1C, this does not equate necessarily to a high time in range. You can have an A1C of 6 and you can have 20% time in range. This is indeed possible, sadly, because it's an average. In fact, that would be worse, in my opinion, to have an A1C of 6 with a 20% time in range than to have an A1C of 8 with a, for argument's sake, 60% time in range. You're definitely going to have less damage to your eyes, your kidneys, your brain, etc., with the latter scenario. Time in range came after A1C and up until very recently has kind of taken over as the gold standard, despite it not appearing in, well, particularly South African guidelines. But despite it not appearing in guidelines and not actually being considered always by funders as gold standard, certainly in diabetes academic circles across the world, time and range has become gold standard. This is a measure of how much of your day are you actually in a range that we consider a normal sugar. Okay, and actually we're even a little bit wider because we go up to 10 millimoles. So if you're talking strict glycemic control, that's a little bit higher. But be that as it may, time and range is something that we do aim for. Now, more recently, we have this new concept called glycemic risk index. And if you look at the little picture, you will see that it's a grid, and what you're wanting to be is in zone A. There's a complex sort of mathematical sum that happens, and it happens using continuous monitoring data. It takes into context the lows, the highs, as well as the variability. So on the bottom axis, you've got the hypoglycemic component as a percentage, and on the vertical axis, you've got the hyperglycemic component as a percentage, and then you've got these zones radiating out from zone A to zone E with a number attached. So 0 to 20 is zone A, and that is a good GRI. So what we do know is that every day is different. Every single day is different. And for me, this is the why use CGM. Why use CGM? Because you cannot say that because yesterday my sugar did XYZ, it's going to do that today. There are multiple things that have a cause and effect on the way the sugar reacts, which means you can't predict. And literally, you need different doses of insulin on different days. And there is only one way to actually figure that out, and that is having all these data points available via continuous glucose monitoring that is accurate. Add to this, if you're a person living with type 1, there are a host of other things that your body doesn't have. For example, a GLP-1 response, a glucagon response. It's not only about insulin. The other hormones are playing like an orchestra in the background. 6 hormones, in fact, have recently been discovered, and I found a little slide off Twitter from mid-Twitter. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because this could be a talk all on its own. But just to familiarize yourself, and actually, if you're a person living with type 1 diabetes, to let yourself off the hook, there are things you don't have, like insulin, amylin, glucagon, pancreatic polypeptide, somatostatin, and ghrelin. So even if you have glucagon, the response of the glucagon is altered if you are living with type 1. So technology has come bursting into our lives in all different forms, and I think we're all aware that artificial intelligence is here and actually quite exciting. In my opinion, and I may be wrong, but this is my opinion, I think it is impossible to manage a condition like type 1 diabetes without continuous glucose monitoring. In my opinion, costs must fall because this type of technology is actually essential. So my challenge to you today is to advocate for yourself, for your community, for your child, for your friend, for your family member, because I believe together we can advocate, and together we can um, put enough pressure on the powers that be to enable this technology to be available for people living with type 1 and, in my opinion, type 2 as well. I like to end these talks with a bit of a yoga pose. And this one is called reverse Pashi Namaskara, or reverse prayer position. And initially, it might be difficult to attain the reverse prayer position with the hands sort of flat behind the back. So the way to sort of get there is to grasp your elbows behind your back. Whilst one can't do alternate nose breathing because one requires the hands to block the nostrils and do reverse Pashi Namaskar one at a time, I challenge you today to try this pose and do some deep breathing and have a beautiful, wonderful day. And if you look at this beautiful pose, it's actually an upside down heart. If you look with the eye of faith, my heart is that any person that has challenges with glucose monitoring or glucose management could have access to any little piece of magic that helps them to manage their day better without stress. Have a lovely day.